Hello, you're joining us here on a brand new episode of Melt. I'm Ritvika Gupta, and on the show today we'll be speaking with Jacob Benbunan, CEO, Saffron Brand Consultants. Anant Rangaswami, editor of Melt, joins me today, as usual. Hi, Anant. So, why Jacob? Why are we speaking to him today?
Last week we, spoke to Landor. This week we are speaking to Saffron, and I think it's because brands and the way consumers interact with brands are undergoing such an enormous change. Now with Jacob, I spent more time trying to understand how different it is to have, these virtual brands, as in where human beings don't interact with a physical space or a product,
right,
but with, brands which are virtually in ether, like a YouTube or a Google or something, as opposed to brick and mortar soap and toothpaste and shampoo. And that's what I explore with him, because this is a new paradigm, a new way that consumers interact, therefore new thinking that brand managers need to have. They're still brand managers, but their priorities are different. For example, with Jacob, we learned that consistency is not so important. And that is a little frightening for me. Till I understand Jacob explain why today's consumers put a lower expectation on consistency than on other attributes.
Well, sounds interesting. So let's dive into the conversation. Let's get ready to melt with Jacob Benbunan.
Morning, Jacob.
Morning, Anant.
Welcome to India.
Wonderful to be here again.
So it's a difficult time for your industry. Is it? I'm asking you. Is it?
It isn't. It isn't. It's a fascinating time for my industry.
Right.
It's a fascinating time because things are moving, things are changing. There's so much disruption going on, provoked by technology, provoked by the new economy, the circular economy, provoked by the fact that the environment is really implying new drivers into businessmen, that actually this makes companies think hard and again about their relationship with their customers, their relationships with their employees, their relationship with society at large. And if you think about your relationship with your different stakeholders, you think about your brand.
Okay, now my problem is, in the last 15, 20 years, we have seen businesses being born, and I'm not sure they are brands. They're businesses being born. They get born and they die. Now, I read a piece in today's newspaper which said of all the unicorns which have been created in India since 2005, 7 or 8 have already died. So what is the life of a brand, and are they really brands?
Well, it all goes back to how you define a brand.
Right.
And in my own personal view, and in Saffron's personal view, there is no dichotomy between what a brand is, what your business stands for, and at the end of the day, a brand is the business. Obviously, it takes time to build a brand because it takes time to build a business. When you start crawling, you need to crawl before you walk, you need to walk before you run, and you need to educate yourself and become an adult. Same thing happens to companies, same thing happens to brand. Obviously, like for the human being, some go faster than others, depending on the take on by the different stakeholders. Obviously, if you look at brand as a logo or as a collection of different visual assets, then definitely business and brand are very different matters. But that's a very profound error. What you have to look at is brand as a promise. Brand as a promise of an experience delivered. And you really agree with me that a brand is the promise of an experience delivered, then brand and business bond into one.
Right. Now, I'll stick to that, brand as a promise of experience delivered. If I go to a McDonald's anywhere in the world, my experience as a consumer is more or less the same. However, if I use, say, a platform like Uber or a business like Airbnb, my experience can differ widely between the first use and the second use and the third use. Different countries have different experiences and so on and so forth. So is this a brand or is it a business? I'm going to provoke you. Is Uber, is Airbnb, are these just businesses? And because the experience is so unpredictable, it's not a brand at all.
A friend of mine once said that a particular airline was unreliably unreliable.
Right.
Just to explain that sometimes it was perfectly on time, sometimes it was a total disaster. Predictable or unpredictable, the reality is that brands that were born under the ecosystem of technology, under the ecosystem of the internet, by definition behave in a very different way than brands that are here come from the old, if I can call that, the old times, the old economy. New economy, if I can call this new economy brands do not champion consistency. They champion being in the front line. Consistency is not as important as it used to be when you are about Airbnb or Uber, just to take the two examples I just said. What's important is the ultimate experience that the client expects. And the experience that the client expects in Mumbai might not be the same experience that the client expects in San Francisco. In terms of the collateral of the experience, the fundamentals of it are the same. You have an app, the app works exactly the same. The car comes, you bump into the car, he takes you wherever you told him to go, and it works. And that's the element of consistency that the customer expects and wants. At the end of the day, it's all about expectations and how you manage expectations. And with a new economy brand, people care less about consistency and more about the experience. And the experience not being exactly the same is actually what makes the brand, because it offers a different cultural influences that make it richer, that make it interesting. And you can say, oh yes, I spent a few days in an Airbnb in Kerala, and I spent a few days in an Airbnb in Costa Rica. They were not exactly the same, but they were exactly the same, because at the end of the day, what I wanted is a Kerala experience or a Costa Rica experience within the Airbnb.
Why doesn't that work in a hotel? Why doesn't the same thing happen in a hotel?
That's the whole thing. The whole thing is that if I choose to spend a few days in an Airbnb, I know that the consistency will not be the same as if I choose to spend a few days in a Hyatt.
Right.
And it's perfectly okay. I choose to go to a Hyatt, I expect, and I normally get what I expect. I choose to stay in Airbnb, I have to expect what the owner of that place is offering me. Yes, there's some definition, there's some explanation on the website, but that's about it. So part of the Airbnb experience goes with the discovery or what am I going to be bumping into.
What about the negative discoveries?
Well,
now,
that's
all these new brands. Again, I'm going back to
definitely.
Uber and Airbnb. I have negative discoveries.
Definitely.
How does that impact the brand? And therefore, I question if it's a brand.
Awfully.
Right.
I myself cancelled. There's a similar service to Uber in one of the European countries we operate, and I myself cancelled it for the whole organization 2 weeks ago because of the awful experience I had 3 days in a row. In the morning, the guy that was supposed to pick me up fell asleep. 2 days after, when I was coming in an airport, the guy shouted at me on the phone, etc. And I said, you know what? I mean, not that Saffron is IBM, but as much as I'm interested...
I'm talking about IBM, you're not IBM.
As much as we're interested, we're not going to work with you anymore.
Right.
That's the big challenge that companies like these have and face, because they don't have the systems and they don't have the infrastructure to really ensure consistency, and they rely in the front line, they rely in the discovery of the experience you're going to have. The danger, the other side of the coin, is that what happens when the experience is a disaster. Well, this is where they have to really focus. And if they don't react when the experience is really bad, then the brand will collapse. Okay. The perception of the brand will totally implode.
You know, like you said, the old economy brands, when there was a problem with the brand, a consumer complaint or whatever, human beings addressed it. Now in this app economy and the new economy, a lot of time you can't even complain, like you might have experienced with your car hire experience.
Car experience, yes.
You know, it goes somewhere into some database and some computer tells you sorry. That's what it does.
Well, that would be a big mistake from the new economy brand, because if they do not install the systems for you to react, the reaction will come from different channels. And what's fascinating about the economy we live in is that companies, organizations, brands have moved from being black boxes to being glass boxes. Before, a black box was you could do whatever you wanted, you could behave how you wanted, and then you could say that you behaved however you wanted. The connection between what you say and what you do did not have to be 100%. You could do it. Now, with the glass box, you have to do what you say, because otherwise, social media will take over. And yes, I won't be able to complain on the website, or my complaint will go to a database and gets dead or unanswered. But I have Twitter, I have Facebook, I have Instagram, I have what have you, any social media available at my reach to tell the world what a shitty experience I had. And the danger of this becoming viral is serious, is awful. So if these new brands that do not know how to treat and how to deliver on the experience they promise, will suffer very much. Right. So there's no leeway, there's no room for little games, because social media is an incredible weapon for the good and for the bad.
Right. Now, we're seeing across the world CMOs relying more on short-termism rather than long-termism, because their jobs themselves are undefined. They can get sacked. I mean, I again read something where the average tenure was coming to 1 year, 8 months for a CMO. So all decisions are taken based on a short-term view, as opposed to, I'd say, the old economy, where everything was taken. IBM, which you brought up, used to take punch on 20 years or 25 years. So how dangerous is short-termism to the brand?
Well, it all goes back to the definition of what a CMO is.
Right.
And in my view, the CMO, as we used to see it when we started our careers, was a very different animal than the CMO that is today. I agree with you that CMOs today have much more tactical duties than strategic duties. And the strategic duties have actually moved away from the CMO box into closer to the CEO box, who actually is circumscribed to more strategic views. Yet, strategy 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where strategies were defined for 3 or 5 years. Now, if you bump into a company that actually talks about my 5-year strategy is X or Y, you have to think harder, because defining a strategy for 5 years today, it's a bit absurd, because the world is changing so fast that it doesn't make sense to define a 5-year strategy. Now, going back to the question about short-termism, it's inevitable that CMOs, or whatever you want to brand them, are much more about short-term, because the dynamism, the speed of things in the economy we live in is so much faster than what it used to be before, that you have to have the elasticity in your brain and the elasticity in your snap decisions to be able to adapt to what your competition does. That doesn't mean that these little tactics that come like this don't really follow a main strategy, but the bad main strategy tends to be defined but one step above by the CEO.
Right. So, when you come to short-termism, another problem is cost when it comes to short-termism. We are seeing in India, and we are seeing across the world. In India, you can get an identity for 2 lakhs of rupees. I mean, since you're familiar with India, I can talk to you in rupees.
Of course.
And you also get all lakhs.
I rather look at lakhs.
2 lakhs, and then you get somebody else saying 2 crores.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of that, you have a procurement, and you complicate that with short-termism. I say, why should I pay Saffron or Landor or whatever 2 crores? Why can't
if I can pay X or Y,
2 lakhs and get ostensibly the same thing? That is the problem, because it's like for like. They give you a manual, they give you a brand identity book, and it looks to be the same. What is different?
Well, there's 2 things here: procurement departments and the actual business department that commissions the job need to get closer together. It's perfectly fine that procurement does their job, and their job is to minimize the cost for the organization, and the bonuses are based on the amount of money they save for the organization. And it's totally respectable, and it has to be like this. I have a procurement department myself, even if we are a small business compared to the very large organizations. At the end of the day, what procurement has to think is what the business at large needs. And the business at large needs what the marketing department or whatever department has defined. They've defined and they've shortlisted 2 or 3 companies that they believe are the ones that actually could fulfill the work. And then procurement comes to negotiate. In my view, when the 3 companies are of the same league, when the 3 companies are of the same caliber, there shouldn't be that much of a problem with procurement, because the difference in pricing would be plus or minus 10-15%. The problem comes when these guys make the mistake of aligning companies that are of the Premier League with companies that are of the third league. With all the respect to the third league companies, some problems can be answered by Premier League companies and some other problems cannot be answered by. And vice versa. Some problems can only be answered by third league companies and not by first league, by Premier League companies. To me, the issue is less so with procurement doing the job, but with marketing actually defining who should be considered to do this job. And if the people that are considered to do this job are the right people, in my view, the price differences should not be and are not that far away. Procurement is a very important unit in the organization, and organizations must observe what procurement says, as long as procurement understands what's in the job.
Right. So Jacob, we've spent maybe 15-20 minutes, and that's all I can spend with you because we run out of time. So tell me what I will get out of this book, which we have not discussed. This is actually the most recent book on branding. Jacob is one of the authors, and it's called Disruptive Branding. So tell me, why have you written this book? Why have you, as in the plural you and your colleagues, and why should marketers read this book? Or who should read this book?
We were approached by a Kogan page, the publishers, about a year ago to write a book on disruption.
On disruption or disruptive branding?
On disruption.
Right.
Our first reaction was, who wants to talk about disruption again?
Right.
Everyone talks about disruption. Jean-Marie Drouet already spoke about disruption 20 years ago.
Many books on disruption.
And there's been many books on who wants another one on 2019. And they said, no, use disruption because disruption sells. And we said, okay, how about combining disruption with what we do, what we know, which is branding. And they said, oh, that's quite interesting, because to what degree branding can be an agent for disruption, or to what degree branding can be a tool to really fight against the disruption that happens to all of us on a daily basis. What this book is about, this book was written by my Chief Creative Officer, Gabo Schreier, my Chief Growth Strategy Officer, Ben Knapp, and myself.
Not your procurement officer.
The chaiwala that co-founded Saffron with Wally Ollins about 19 years ago. And what this is about 100 years that the three of us of experience have blended into 240 pages. It's a book that we've tried to make as simple as possible in 10, 11 chapters that actually cover everything that someone that gets involved with branding needs to understand.
Today.
From the CEO, to the CMO, to the student. Today, obviously. There's a lot of experience here, and it's all illustrated with clients that we've worked with, or clients that we've not worked with, but are really models that we should learn from it.
So Jacob, we've grown up in a world with the old economy where we say brick and mortar companies, and now we're living in the world where you have products which are completely ether. For example, YouTube. I can't see, touch, feel it, but I can experience it. And you did a lot of work for YouTube. So tell me, what was that experience from the client side and your side?
When we started working with YouTube, YouTube was the world's largest repository of video. It had 1 billion users. Our experience with YouTube was precisely that, the largest repository of video. So there was no order, everything was chaos. But yes, you could find whatever you wanted. The challenge YouTube had was that they knew they were going to grow, and there was another 1 billion users that were going to come from places like India, for the Philippines, Indonesia, that were growing very, very, very fast. Big challenges there is that access to the internet is the same quality or the same availability and speed as you have in Western Europe or in America, and yet people will want to do this. So the big challenge was that, taking advantage of my engineering background, if you know that the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, says that in an ever-expanding world, chaos is inevitable. But I told our clients at YouTube that you are an ever-expanding universe, so chaos is inevitable. So what you're asking us to do, to try to get some order into a chaos, is quite impossible, because nature is the way it is. And none of us is God, so it's impossible. However, we tried to define a brand architecture that was inspired in our experience in place branding. And to make a very long story short, you could experience YouTube in a much more ordered way without missing all the value and the power of being the world's largest repository of videos. So you have YouTube Music, and you have YouTube Gaming, and you have YouTube Kids, and you have a very different user interface, and you have a very different user experience. This week, YouTube relaunched again a font to really adapt to the different circumstances, whether you access it on a laptop or you access it on a computer or on a mobile phone, etc. So the whole experience gets consistent, going back to the consistency issue that we discussed before. And it's working marvelous, to the point of YouTube having today 1.9 billion users, and it continues growing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Anant.
On that note, it's a wrap on this episode of Melt. You can watch all our content on our social media platforms. Our handle is Ready to Melt, and I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Goodbye.